It was one of those quiet evenings in the heart of a bustling city, when the sun starts setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, and the streets seemed to hum with the rhythm of life. Marcus Henderson loved this time of day. For him, there was nothing quite like hopping on his motorcycle, feeling the engine rumble beneath him, and cruising through the city streets. It was freedom. It was peace. On his bike, he didn't have to think about the challenges of the day or the weight he carried as a black man in a world that didn't always feel fair. Marcus was well known in his community. A teacher by day and a mentor to troubled kids by night, he was the kind of man people looked up to. His students adored him, and his neighbors respected him. But what he cherished most was the simple joy of riding his sleek black and chrome bike, a symbol of his hard work and resilience. As Marcus cruised through a neighborhood a little ways from his own, he noticed the air change. Not the weather, but the vibe. The stares felt sharper, the glares longer. He'd been here before, and he knew what to expect. Some places didn't welcome faces like his, no matter how kind his smile or how respectable his demeanor. Still, he wasn't one to let fear dictate his life. He tightened his grip on the handlebars and kept riding, the wind brushing against his face like a quiet reassurance. Unbeknownst to Marcus, just a few blocks ahead, Officer Doug Warren sat in his squad car, sipping coffee and scanning the streets. Doug was a seasoned cop with a reputation that wasn't exactly stellar. Known for his no-nonsense attitude and a sharp eye for suspicious activity, Doug believed in his ability to sniff out trouble before it even started. But there was something else about Doug, something unspoken but evident to those who crossed his path. He had a habit, a dangerous one, of letting his biases guide his judgment. Doug spotted Marcus in an instant. The shining motorcycle, the confidence in his posture, the color of his skin, it was like a trigger. His mind began crafting a narrative before Marcus even reached the intersection. What's a guy like him doing here? Doug muttered under his breath, setting down his coffee and turning on the engine. As Marcus approached the light, he noticed the squad car pull out from the curb. He felt that familiar pit in his stomach, the one that told him this ride might not end as peacefully as it began. He tried to focus on the road ahead, but the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror were impossible to ignore. Doug didn't hesitate. The siren blared and Marcus pulled over, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd done nothing wrong, and yet he knew this wasn't going to be a simple stop. As Doug approached the bike, his hand hovered near his holster, not out of necessity, but out of habit. License and registration, he barked, his tone cold and commanding. Marcus stayed calm. He'd been taught how to handle these situations, how to keep his hands visible, his tone polite, and his movement slow. "Yes, officer," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket for his wallet. Doug's eyes narrowed, scanning Marcus like he was searching for a reason, any reason, to escalate the situation. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. Marcus looked him in the eye, holding his ground without raising his voice. "Just passing through." "Is there a problem?" Doug didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped back, looking over the bike, as if it might reveal some hidden secret. His thoughts raced, filled with assumptions and stereotypes that clouded his judgment. He didn't see Marcus the teacher, the mentor, the man beloved by his community. He saw a black man on an expensive motorcycle, and to Doug, that was enough to raise an alarm. But then something unexpected happened, something neither of them saw coming. A small group of kids, no older than 10, came running down the sidewalk, shouting Marcus's name. "Mr. Henderson, Mr. Henderson." They called out, their faces lighting up when they saw him. Doug froze, caught off guard. Marcus turned to the kids, his tense expression softening into a warm smile. "Hey, guys, what are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine care. The kids surrounded him, chattering excitedly about their day and how they'd just come from the park. One of them looked up at Doug, curiosity replacing the fear that had momentarily crossed their face. "Is Mr. Henderson in trouble?" the child asked innocently. Doug didn't know what to say. For the first time, he saw Marcus not as a threat, but as a human being, someone who clearly meant the world to these kids. It was a crack in the armor Doug had built around himself, a fleeting moment of doubt that made him question everything he thought he knew. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. But this was only the beginning. The truth had started to surface, but Doug wasn't ready to face it, not yet. The road ahead was still filled with tension, revelations, and the potential for change. Would Doug confront his biases and see Marcus for who he truly was, or would he cling to the prejudice that had shaped his career for so long? The answer lay in the moments that followed, moments that would challenge everything both men believed about themselves and each other. Doug watched the kids interact with Marcus, his hand still resting on his holster. He felt a strange unease creeping into his chest, one he wasn't used to. It wasn't the usual adrenaline he got when he felt like he was in control of a situation. No, this was different. It was the feeling of something cracking, something he wasn't ready to name. The kids didn't seem to notice Doug's discomfort. They were too busy talking to Marcus, telling him about their bike races at the park and how they'd been practicing the lessons he taught them about standing up for themselves and staying out of trouble. Marcus laughed with them, his earlier tension melting away. He had a way with people, especially kids, and it showed. Doug stepped back, his grip on authority loosening without him even realizing it. He scanned the scene, noticing how people on the sidewalk were starting to slow down, watching the interaction. Some of them looked at Doug with wary eyes, as if they were waiting for him to make the wrong move. Others smiled at Marcus, clearly recognizing him. "Mr. Henderson, are you gonna come to the block party tomorrow?" one of the kids asked, tugging at his sleeve. Marcus grinned. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it. You know I've got to defend my title in the basketball game." The kids laughed and cheered, but Doug's expression hardened again. He didn't know why, but something about this man, this scene, bothered him. It wasn't just Marcus's confidence or the way people seemed to look up to him. It was the fact that, for a moment, Doug felt out of place. Like maybe he wasn't the one in control after all. "All right, kids, that's enough," Doug interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. "You should head on home." The kids hesitated, glancing at Marcus for reassurance. He nodded at them, his tone gentle. "Go on now. I'll see you tomorrow." As the kids ran off, Doug turned back to Marcus, trying to regain his footing. "Let's get back to this," he said, his words clipped. "License and registration." Marcus handed over his documents without protest, but there was a weight in the air now. He didn't say a word, letting the silence between them grow. Doug scanned the license, his eyes lingering on the address. It was a neighborhood not far from here, but worlds apart in reputation. "You live around here?" Doug asked, though he already knew the answer. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his tone even. "I grew up here. Moved a few blocks over a while back, but I still spend a lot of time in the neighborhood." Doug grunted, handing the license back. "You come through here often?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Doug. He knew this game. He played it before. "When I need to," he said simply. Doug's jaw tightened. He didn't like the way Marcus stayed calm, unshaken. It made him feel exposed, like Marcus could see straight through him. "All right," Doug said after a moment, stepping back. "You're free to go." Marcus hesitated. He didn't expect that. That's it. Doug nodded, though his face was hard to read. That's it. Marcus started his bike, but as the engine roared to life, he turned to Doug. You know, he said, his voice steady, not everyone you stop is out to cause trouble. Some of us are just trying to live. Doug didn't respond. He just stood there, watching as Marcus pulled away, the sound of the motorcycle fading into the distance. But the encounter stuck with him. Later that night, sitting alone in his cramped apartment, Doug found himself thinking about Marcus. About the kids. About the way people in the neighborhood had looked at him, not with respect, but with distrust. It wasn't new, but for the first time it bothered him. Doug had always told himself he was a good cop, that he was just doing his job, keeping the streets safe. But now he wasn't so sure. The next day, Doug found himself driving through the same neighborhood, though his shift hadn't assigned him there. He told himself it was routine, but deep down he knew it wasn't. He parked his car near the park and watched from a distance as kids played basketball, their laughter echoing through the air. And then he saw him, Marcus, standing on the court, coaching a group of kids. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket or riding his motorcycle. He was just Marcus, the teacher, the mentor. The guy who'd been stopping by the neighborhood for years, not to cause trouble, but to make it better. Doug's chest tightened. He didn't know why, but he couldn't bring himself to drive away. Instead, he got out of the car and approached the court, his uniform catching the attention of everyone there. The laughter stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. Marcus looked up, spotting Doug immediately. His expression didn't change, but his body language shifted. He stood a little straighter, his shoulders tense. Doug cleared his throat, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on him. "Mind if I watch for a bit?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Suit yourself." Doug stood off to the side, his arms crossed as he watched Marcus work with the kids. They listened to him, hung on his every word. He wasn't just teaching them basketball. He was teaching them respect, discipline, and confidence. For the first time, Doug saw Marcus for who he really was. And it made him question everything he thought he knew, not just about Marcus, but about himself. But this was far from over. Doug's journey to the truth had only just begun, and the road ahead would challenge him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Would he have the courage to confront his own biases, or would he let them continue to cloud his judgment, keeping him from seeing the world, and the people in it, for what they truly were? The answer was closer than he realized, but getting there would come at a cost. Doug returned to the park the next day, telling himself it was just to keep an eye on things. But deep down, he knew that wasn't the full truth. Something about Marcus and the way he carried himself had unsettled Doug in a way he couldn't shake. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something much harder to admit. Guilt. He parked his squad car a little further away this time, wanting to observe without drawing too much attention. From a distance, he could see Marcus again, surrounded by kids. This time, a few parents stood by, chatting and laughing as they watched. Marcus wasn't just a mentor to the kids. He was a pillar of the community. Doug's thoughts wandered. How many times had he looked at someone and assumed the worst? How many people had he judged without really knowing them? He remembered the way Marcus had stayed calm during their interaction, how he hadn't lashed out or raised his voice, even though he had every reason to. As Doug stood there, lost in thought, a man approached him. "You lost?" The man asked, his tone polite but firm. Doug turned to see one of the parents from the group. He was tall, with a cautious look in his eyes. "No," Doug replied, clearing his throat. "Just observing." The man crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. You don't need to observe. We're good here. Marcus keeps this place safe. Doug felt the weight of the man's words. I'm sure he does, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The man didn't move, didn't smile. Then why are you here? To find something wrong where there isn't anything. Doug hesitated. He didn't have an answer, at least not one he could explain. Before he could say anything, Marcus noticed them and walked over, a basketball tucked under his arm. What's going on? Marcus asked, his tone calm but guarded. The man gestured toward Doug. He's been watching. Just thought he should know we don't need him here. Marcus looked at Doug, his expression unreadable. It's all right, he said to the man. I've got it. The man hesitated, then nodded and walked back to the group. Marcus turned his full attention to Doug, who suddenly felt small under his gaze. What do you want, officer? Marcus asked, his voice even but firm. Doug took a deep breath. This was the moment he'd been avoiding, the moment he couldn't run from anymore. I wanted to apologize, he said, the words feeling heavy as they left his mouth. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. For what? For stopping you the other day, Doug admitted. For assuming, for judging you before I even knew who you were. Marcus didn't say anything at first. He studied Doug as if trying to figure out if he was being sincere. Why now? Doug looked down, then back up, meeting Marcus's eyes. Because I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things. And seeing you here with these kids, it made me realize that I've spent too much time looking for the worst in people instead of seeing the good. There was a long silence between them. The sounds of the park seemed distant, like the world had faded into the background for a moment. Marcus finally spoke. It's not enough to realize it. You have to do something about it. Doug nodded. I know. I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to start. Marcus didn't smile, but his expression softened. Then start by listening. Start by seeing people for who they are, not who you think they are. Doug nodded again, the weight in his chest feeling just a little lighter. Thank you, he said quietly. Marcus gave a small nod, then turned and walked back to the court. Doug stood there for a while longer, watching as Marcus resumed his game with the kids, their laughter filling the air once again. That day changed Doug. It didn't erase the mistakes he'd made or the biases he carried, but it planted a seed, a willingness to grow, to see the world through a different lens. He started taking steps to educate himself, to challenge his own assumptions, and to become a better cop and a better person. As for Marcus, he kept doing what he'd always done, showing up, making a difference, and proving that no matter how people saw him at first glance, his actions would always speak louder than their assumptions. In the end, it wasn't a grand, dramatic moment that changed everything. It was small steps, conversations, realizations, and choices made every day. For both Doug and Marcus, it was a reminder that the truth wasn't about winning or losing. It was about seeing each other clearly as human beings and finding a way forward together. And as the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, the city hummed with life once more, its streets filled with stories of change, growth, and the quiet power of understanding.